Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Shalom, good evening. Welcome to another episode of the Big Daddy Liberty Show's Liberty and Friends, coming to you every Sunday at 8 p.m. here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Goodness me, it's been a while since we have seen each other. You can thank the weather demons for that, with KwaZulu-Natal, the province in which the show comes at you from, having experienced some of the worst storms on record since the 80s, the weather hippies tend to say at the moment. And it's been a very rough couple of weeks in the aftermath of that particular storm. We're going to unpack that and more tonight on the BDL show as we have the conversation around what can we attribute the extent of the damage in KwaZulu-Natal and really Durban in specific, given that's where I am. I'm in the township of Umlazi. What can we attribute the extent of the damage, the nature of the chaos to? Is it pure happenstance? And, you know, as some people have said, oh, Big Daddy, they say, this is a freak storm. No one could have predicted it. No one could have anticipated it. All your claims of government failure are just unfair. The ANC have been absolutely stellar as a government in Durban in responding to this. That is, of course, one line of thought, one which I think will be challenged by many a Durbanite, many a resident of KZN. And of course, the other, which I'm hoping tonight's Friends panel will help me unpack, is can we attribute a lot of, firstly, the extent of the damage, the nature of the damage, the lack of forewarning, the aftermath, the chaos, the humanitarian disaster that is developing here in Durban and all parts of KZN in the wake of the storm? Can we attribute that to a failure of government on the one hand, and of course, policy, that is ANC policy in this country for the last going on 30 years in South Africa? That is a conversation that requires us to look at the political nature of eThekwini, KZN, South Africa, the economic echelons, rather, the economic levels in which most South Africans find themselves in. Were they economically able to prepare and to be able to deal with a storm like this one? And of course, the social nature of who we are as South Africans in times of disaster. You know, often with our politicians trying to insert themselves at the helm of who we are as society. So we're going to have that conversation. We're going to unpack it. Grab yourself a warm of, as they say in Afrikaans, a warm drink. Those are two different types of drinks, warm and warm. Y'all can figure that out. And we're going to unpack this in a, let's call it 90-minute conversation here with the Friends panel this evening. Before we get to the panel, remember, as always, I'm sure you've forgotten, it has been a few weeks I've been out of action, that the best way that you can support the Big Daddy Liberty Show with all its content is simply liking the content. Do it right now. Hit that like button and share the stream. Make sure more people are basically able to see that, hey, we're back here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. And I did mention earlier on that I'll get into tonight's panel of friends who will help us unpack this issue and much, much, much more. Here's a face we haven't seen in a while. He is an independent journalist, someone who has a very sharp pen that can at times even be a scalpel, cutting deep into the insecurities of lefties, hippies, and right-wing authoritarians. I'm talking, of course, about Upra Ivo Vegter. There he is, the champion of liberty with the pen. Ivo, good evening.
Good evening. It's very nice to see you again, and very nice to see that you are healthy and well after the disaster in where you are.
Yeah, man. There were times where I was not quite sure that we would make it, but I'll get into that, of course, tonight. Welcome to it. That is, of course, Ivo Vegter, independent journalist. Here's a fella who we have had on the show before. Great insights, great economic insights in particular. He's, of course, a part of those lads over at Solidariteit. Of course, that is the union out in Pretoria representing hundreds of thousands of members in the country. There he is on screen, Theuns du Buisson. Theuns, hello. Theuns, your mic is muted.
Yeah, good evening, Sishle. Always happy to be here and glad to see you're still safe.
Hey, man, good to see you. Thank you very much for joining us tonight on the show. A man who needs very little introduction. He is himself a host of a show, a growing podcast that I know you guys love. That is the ManPatria podcast. You'll catch them every Monday at 7 p.m. I am talking, of course, about the head honcho over at that studio, Dumo Denga. There he is. Dumo, good evening.
Yes, Sishle, good evening to everyone. I hope you guys had a great day and looking forward to having a great discussion. And yes, good to see that you're well, Sishle.
Thank you, my brother. Very, very good to see you. As always, I must just give a quick apology for one of the guests who was going to join us tonight, Thandaxolo Mabaso. He's, of course, a business analyst out in Pretoria. He had a personal issue that he had to attend to and just asked to convey his apologies for that. But last but definitely not least, someone who really is in every respect, especially on all things guns and self-defense, a guru in that regard. Someone who I hope will lead us into the nirvana, I hope, of a 2A, that's a Second Amendment, hopefully, please, Lord, in South Africa, is Gideon Joubert, of course, of Paratus.info. Baba, good evening.
Good evening, Sishle, and sure, that's one heck of an introduction. I'll try not to disappoint anybody as a result, but thank you. It's great to be back.
Dude, shout out to you. Welcome to it. And of course, this is Big Liberty and Friends. Welcome to it. If you've just joined us, the friends have just been introduced. You can see their names on screen. Welcome to it. Grab yourself a warm drink. As I said, we're going to be rocking the show for the next 90 minutes or so as we unpack the aftermath of the KZN floods and really just the extent of the damage and how South Africans in this part of the world are responding to this disaster. Guys, you know, as we maybe unpack this conversation and before, let me not forget, of course, to remind you, dear viewer, that you are the extra friend panelist tonight. We will be flighting your comments across the screen throughout the evening. So maybe send them through thick and thin, please. They will be on the screen. Welcome to it. Good evening and welcome to Liberty and Friends. Guys, you know, even as I settled down into and to explore a stream of consciousness around this issue, there's so many facets to this conversation that have to be unpacked. But let's begin, perhaps, let's jog our memories back. And for, unfortunately, Durban residents and those of us who are in this part of the world, it's a traumatic memory, if anything. The few, let's call it days preceding the storm. You know, a lot of finger pointing is being done at the moment around why weren't we warned of this storm. I've had a few weather hippies, and of course, when I say weather hippies, I mean meteorologists and the like. Guys who've contacted me off the record, of course, saying, hey man, some of us have been trying to raise the issue on this, but we were unable to by and large because all things weather prediction have been centralized effectively by the state, the South African Weather Service. Ivo, I'm going to come to you on this because I do happen to remember a while back when this decision or law was passed, you tweeted a few things about it. I think you may have even written about it. I just can't remember in that regard. But a lot of people were warning back then that, hey, man, maybe centralizing something like this is not a good idea.
Yeah, that's right. Only the South African Weather Service is legally allowed to make weather forecasts in this country, which is, of course, problematic. I just looked back on what the weather forecast was just before the heavy rains hit KwaZulu-Natal, and there was a warning out. The warning said to expect about 40 millimeters of rain in the KwaZulu-Natal coastal areas. That was it. Now, as we know, we've seen many places with over 600 millimeters of rain. It was an absolute disaster. And the thing is, it is not like this was an unusual event at all. Cut-off lows happen. They happen, and I was reading up about them today. They happen specifically in the mid-latitudes between 25 and 40 degrees south, and they are most heavily concentrated in the patch of sea just off the KwaZulu-Natal coast around the world. They are the most common. That's the most common area for cut-off lows. We've had them before. We know how they operate. We know what they do. We know that they drop massive amounts, hundreds of millimeters of rain in a very short space of time. So this is really not something that couldn't have been predicted. It's something that probably should have been predicted.
No, absolutely. And, even as I bring us back on screen here, just pardon me, I am a bit rusty. For me, there was something very scary about those exact sort of quote unquote predictions. In fact, I can't name these people. So guys, forgive me if I don't mention particular names because they did ask to remain anonymous. The official warning was what they called a category 5, I think, warning that was issued nationally. Whereas these guys, this group of meteorologists, not that they belong to one organization, but various organizations, especially who feed information to farmers, actually said no. Their predictions were a category 10 warning was actually needed. The kind of warning that would elicit a pre-response by, let's say, the KZN government or Durban in order to prepare their disaster management teams. And because that wasn't necessarily done, you then saw a situation where effectively the city of Durban was caught pretty much unawares in terms of the kind of disaster that was looming. Ivo, I'm going to give you a second crack at that before I open it up, because for me, that seemed to be the issue here. You had a situation as because we were not forewarned, no one was actually prepared for what was coming.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, look, the government was very poorly prepared in the first place, and it wasn't just activating a disaster management operation before the storm actually hit. It was all sorts of other stuff. The stormwater drainage systems, right, were blocked and were broken in many places. There was so much that went into it that could have been done to make KwaZulu-Natal better prepared for this particular storm. And again, I stress that this is a regular occurrence for KwaZulu-Natal. This is not new. It's not something that only happened in the last few years. It's not, climate change or whatever. If you go back to the storms of the 80s, they were actually bigger than what we had this month. So you would expect that a government in a province where this is a regular occurrence, it happens every 5 or 10 years, would be prepared and would make sure that drainage systems are properly looked after, that zoning and so on happens correctly, so that there's proper drainage and people don't build in floodplains and build on steep slopes and ravines and so on. It's all of that comes together in what made the KwaZulu-Natal government spectacularly unprepared for any event like this.
Absolutely. And again, you raised two important features here that I want to open up to everybody else here. But it's the notion, of course, of being prepared for what is, or rather, sorry, let me take 2 steps back. It's the notion of being prepared as a local administration for a type of a climate and a type of a weather system that is. This is not new. This is not quote unquote climate change, as is now being peddled by politicians as effectively a form of an excuse. Effectively, those of us who are Durbanites know that this is the kind of weather we experience in peak periods of primarily summer, of course, with the summer rains, and of course towards winter, and then it tapers off in the height of winter. Now, it might not be a heavy storm like this one every year, but heavy rains are not new to Durban. If anything, if you're a Durban resident, that is an old school Durban resident, I was born and raised here, you'll know that city engineering in the past, effectively even in townships, was designed to drain water away as fast as possible. This is not a new concept to Durban, but it seems as though that as things progressed, maybe the infrastructure, that is also the manpower, I'm looking for the right word here, the skill set, if you will, of the eThekwini, or what used to be the Durban municipality, have clearly tapered off in the wrong direction, insofar as basics like cleaning drains ahead of storms is not done anymore. And of course, the other issue becomes the amount of trash in the city. It's amazing how multiple things had to fail for this storm to be as devastating as it was. Suddenly, it became apparent, and clearly apparent, why the inability of eThekwini waste services to meet a growing population in eThekwini became an issue, where suddenly the trash clogged drains, or the non-collection of refuse timeously and at an adequate level became a massive problem. There were tsunami waves, if you will, in some cases. I'm hoping I can play you a video of massive trash heaps running with the water and causing some of the disaster, the destruction. I'm going to come to you, Theuns, because you're just next to Ivo. But it seems to me that government failure here seems to be the almost, it all whittles down to that effectively.
Yeah, no, for sure, Sishle. Yeah, I mean, you take a small thing like monopolizing weather predictions. Like a simple example of that would be up until last year, every time a hailstorm would be approaching Pretoria or Bloemfontein, where I'm originally from, you'd get an SMS on your phone telling you that they suggest getting your car under roof of some kind because a hailstorm might be approaching. And a friend of mine in this insurance industry told me the other day that they're not sending, some still are, but they're not sending those SMSs out anymore because that constitutes a weather warning. And the government has a monopoly on that. They can actually get fines, and those authorizing the warnings can actually even get jail sentences, according to this person who told me this. So, I mean, government is basically monopolizing safety. And yeah, then all the little failures paired with bad legislation, such as the monopoly on weather warnings, adds up. Like you don't clean the stormwater drains, don't clear away rubbish. All of those little things don't warn people, and well, don't do the correct zoning and pay attention to flood levels and all of that. And next thing you have a disaster that shouldn't be. And I mean, let's say it is in fact climate change, then shouldn't that be all the more reason? I mean, our president is constantly telling us we have to work with the climate instead of against it. Let's say they actually did believe that, then wouldn't clearing out stormwater drains and getting ready, being prepared, wouldn't that be much higher on the list then? Instead of focusing purely on prevention, let's focus on the actual results of climate change. And even if the climate didn't change, I mean, Durban is prone to flash floods, as are most of our cities and towns on the coast, especially in the warmer areas. So be prepared for that. And if you're telling everyone to be prepared for the worst ever, then you should be first to be prepared for that from government side. But we've seen the exact opposite, and then especially in the aftermath. I mean, people don't have drinking water, and then what did we see? The truck comes bringing clean water, and they stop at the premier's house first and drop the entire load there before moving on. I mean, the priorities, and it went like that with pretty much all the relief.
Absolutely, and we'll get to all of those facets in a moment, because pardon me, a very interesting comment by Bruce Thackwell there at the bottom. Cut to the chase, people. He says it's a ANC mismanagement period. He's not wrong, because at the end of the day, and I tweeted something to this effect a week ago, and I said, once we get to a point where we're mopping up and we're beginning to have a handle of the situation, we need to have a very, very terse and very honest conversation about the ANC as a government and as a political party, as Durbanites, as residents here. Excuse me. And that conversation isn't to say, because a lot of people then retort back, oh, maybe people need to stop voting ANC, and then these things won't happen. And I'm like, guys, stop saying stupid shit like that. Excuse my language, because Durban residents did not vote ANC and make them a majority. In fact, the ANC got 42% of the vote in Durban in the last election. They lost eThekwini, and in the previous election they got 56% from what was the previous election where they had 68% or 62%. So clearly the ANC support in the city has been tapering off. The issue isn't that the ANC was in power necessarily, or pardon me, let me rephrase that, because the issue is that the ANC was in power, but rather it isn't that people did not vote or did vote for the ANC. The ANC lost this particular election and were brought back into power by opposition parties. And I raise this on purpose because it felt as though, Dumo, I want to come to you. It felt for a lot of people like the frustration of people wanting change on a political front, because they saw how the politics was affecting everything else in Durban. One felt the palpable sense of, holy heck, where we thought we got rid of these people, they're still here. And now we're in a disaster. And those same people are here. And if anything, Dumo, those same people who we saw loot disaster funds during Spicy Cough now have access to R1 billion plus for the KZN floods. A lot of people were not inspired by the ANC having to respond as a government to these floods.
Exactly. I mean, I remember there was even a Twitter account that said we should donate to a government organization. I think it was an ANC account. And then people are saying, please do not donate to this account. Rather give to Gift of the Givers, because they'll use their money more effectively. And I mean, this is just the response to the flood, in my opinion, is nothing more than ANC failures that we've been seeing, I mean, when I get in my car and I drive, there's potholes everywhere. It's like you're playing Temple Run, And even yesterday, driving to Pretoria, the highways are in a bad condition. It's just the decay is everywhere. So, and also, I mean, look at Eskom. I mean, Eskom has been run by the state, and look what's happening. I mean, we have load shedding like there's no tomorrow. We had load shedding last week, even went to stage 4 and so forth. And now we have a disaster in KZN after the government decided to monopolize weather forecasting. And this is what we have. This is no surprise. I mean, whatever the ANC touches, it just becomes worse and worse and worse over time. And, the reality is that even though they got all this power, they will never say that they're responsible for it. They will never look upon themselves and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing this stuff. But that's the problem. When you give these guys more power, even if you feel that they are competent, the reality is that every government is going to reach its limit. If they're going to try to be everything to everyone, at some point, they're going to not have enough resources to actually fulfill the objectives that they think that they can fulfill. And I mean, we've seen many examples of this around the world with healthcare and so forth and so forth. So I'm not really surprised by this. And it's really sad because, as Ivo said, this is something that could have been predicted. And, I remember insurance companies used to send us messages of hailstorms and stuff like that. And they have every interest to do that, because if they have a surge of claims, that's going to probably interrupt their cash flow and so forth. And that's why they provided a service like that. But what incentive does the government have to provide weather forecasting? I mean, I don't know. I just think that, they just taking on more and more and more, and they're not doing much with it. And now we're starting to see the failures of it. And now let's go to the funds that they want to use. I'm telling you, those funds are going to be looted straight up. If there's R1 billion, 900 million is going to be taken away. Then then the remaining will be left for whatever. And and if they, and that's it. That's what I think is going to happen. So I'm not surprised by that.
Dumo, I giggle as you say that, not because I necessarily find it funny, but rather because it stupefies one that this is the kind and caliber of quote unquote leadership that the ANC seems to put forward. People who quite literally, even in the face of the blatant human suffering of other people, blatant human suffering. I can take you to parts of eThekwini, Durban right now, where there are people literally standing, in Zulu we say, "Babamba makhanda." They have their hands on their heads in despair, not knowing where their next meal is coming from, not having any form of shelter, having lost all belongings, if anything, not just belongings, but having seen relatives being swept away by violent, raging waters. Even in the face of that kind of human suffering, some filthy politician in this part of the world is going to dig his grubby, sticky fingers into that pot of money meant for those people and literally line his pockets so he can fucking go to I just swore, my apologies for that, but he can go to some establishment, some la-di-da establishment here and blow money like a pimp, literally in America, if you can imagine it, in a nice purple suit and a gold pimp cup, as you can imagine it. That's the nature of eThekwini. That is the Durban that we Durbanites, that we South Africans are expected to just accept as being a normality. That is who those opposition parties who brought the ANC back into power in this part of the world, that is who they've propped up in this election when we Durban residents said no to these filthy commies and socialists who govern this part of the world. I'm sorry, Gideon, I come at you with a little bit of vehemence and anger now in my voice because this is very personal for those of us who live in this part of the world. We saw the actual destruction of infrastructure, shared infrastructure that we Durbanites use on a day-to-day basis. And we all just knew instinctively, these cadres, they're literally going to come in and try and milk the system. Is that the nature of who we are now politically in this country?
So, with regards to the issue of predicting and forecasting this, I'm not even going to touch on that because I think that topic has been more than adequately addressed by everybody else. The one thing that does stand out to me in the wake of this, very, very obviously, is that as far as disaster and incident response and management is concerned, those elements are non-existent. They're non-existent at national level. They're certainly non-existent at provincial level, and they're totally non-existent at municipal level, at least as far as KZN is concerned. And it's not surprising. It is enraging, and it is an absolute scandal. But it's not surprising because this is exactly a repeat under different circumstances of what we saw last year with the July unrest and rioting. And what we have here is a event. Okay, it is. It's not a catastrophe. It's not entirely unheard of. Floods and natural disasters happen, and adverse and highly destructive weather conditions occur, and they might not be regular, but they do happen. And even when they do happen, you need to have a response capacity for these things. And it is to a degree okay if your response capacity is overwhelmed by the scale of the event, of the disaster. However, there must still be a type of response capacity. And from what I've seen from the outside looking in and having spoken with people across KZN, there appears to have been no meaningful response capacity from the authorities at all. There's no plan. There are no deployed assets. There is no resource management at all. It is just a criminally negligent failure. And in a working democracy, the people in charge of this business would be put on trial and sent to prison because their failure literally cost lives, in the sense that they were charged with responsibilities. They were given stewardship of a specific portfolio, and they neglected it completely, full with the knowledge that their negligence in this regard, in the event of something going sideways, which is part of their portfolio to mitigate against, people will die as a result. It is culpable homicide at the very least. And unfortunately, this is exactly what our political leadership in this country, for the most part, looks like. And certainly with regards to the ANC, is people, these are criminal politicians who are so self-obsessed with their own patronage or shall we say pursuit of patronage and self-enrichment, that they could not care less how many people's lives are destroyed as a result of that activity. And they've gotten away with it for 27 years. And that is a major thing that needs to change, because I can promise you more of this is to come. And the situation will not improve until citizens take active ownership and take that away from government almost in its entirety, as much as one can.
And again, I must just extend an apology for the foul language a little earlier on, but it really is something that, as Durbanites, we're livid at the moment. I mean, I've got a comment here, actually just before this comment, and this one also it helps me segue to the next topic that I wanted to get in here. But there was someone here, Restevo Tate, basically saying, hey, you know what? We have actually had no water in Bluff. This is in Durban for nearly 2 weeks. Again, courtesy of this ANC administration. And I must say, this has been the situation across the city and really in the province. And it gets even worse. Now, here's what makes it frustrating for me. Restevo rightly points out that they haven't had water for 2 weeks, owing to the disaster, of course. And he rightly should be livid with the fact that it's taking 2 weeks for some of these repairs to happen. But for some of us in this city, having no water is literally a day-to-day thing. For instance, where I'm at here in Mlazi, the water is actually shut off at 7 p.m. every evening without fail. It's the one, failure is the one thing the ANC is actually quite consistent at and actually quite good at. Because insofar as failing to provide water, in this instance, they will switch off the water timeously and efficiently every evening at 7, and it only comes back, and this is where they become inconsistent, either 3 a.m. or 4 p.m., sometimes 5 p.m., and it inconveniences people who live in this part of the world. Durban has had water shedding. Much like load shedding of electricity, we've had water shedding in parts of Durban, predominantly poor parts of Durban, in particular, Mlazi, townships in particular. This is where the failure often happens. And there's a reason why I'm raising this issue. Helen Zille, the former leader of the Democratic Alliance, and currently it's something or other. Shout out to Helen. I don't know what she actually does there now, but she's in the leadership still somehow. Said something on air very recently. Ivor, I'm going to come to you with this one. And of course, the Twitterati and the political elites, the trendy lefties in our corporate media went berserk, where effectively they extrapolated one thing that she had said, which is to the effect of, actually, it is better off. A poor person is likely better off being in the Western Cape or Cape Town than in the rest of the country, with the context being, because their administration at least delivers the basics, it makes it easy for that poor person to be poor, but to actually, because they have services, have that stepping stone to exit their poverty because the services are there. And of course, the trendy lefties went mad because how dare Helen, she's a racist, blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure how this has anything to do with race, but, how dare she, Ivo? They totally lost their minds at Helen having made what I would consider a very factual statement, but in their case, how dare she, white privilege, blah, blah, blah. Now, here I am, Ivo, sitting in Durban thinking, oh, but hang on, she's right. Because if I live in Durban, or if I live in East London, or anywhere else in this country, I know that being a poor person here means I need to put up with things that the state claims they do for me, but do not do because of one reason or the other. Ivo, weigh in. Is Helen Zille wrong? Is she being a racist to this comment? Or do I not have any excuse to complain as a Umlazi resident when my water is shut off as a poor person?
You have every right to complain, and you should complain loudly. And I think Helen Zille is quite right. If you had to choose, if you were poor, right, you have nothing, you're unemployed, or you have a very low wage job, and you had to choose a township, right, where you wanted to live, right? And you could travel wherever you wanted, right? Where would you choose to go? Would you go to Umlazi, or would you go to Langa or Khayelitsha? And I would wager that your life would be better in Langa or Khayelitsha, and for the simple reason that the DA government there does provide basic services. You don't have water shedding there. It provides water. It provides electricity. It tries to keep the roads fairly decent. It provides decent clinics. The schools, in decent condition that actually function. And it's all of these basic services, I mean, I think I saw Helen on Twitter today saying, she doesn't provide the government doesn't provide garages and driveways and gardens for people, because that's what people provide for themselves. In the richer areas. So your life isn't going to be great in any of these townships, but your basic needs will be met. And that is from where you can take a next step, and you can step up, because you're not going to be sick all the time. You're not going to be queuing at a clinic for 3 days to get basic treatment. So I think she's absolutely right in saying that. Years ago, when load shedding first started, I wrote a piece on my blog. I was blogging then. This was before the Daily Maverick still, and I said, water is next. Right, water shedding is next, and people were shouting me down. They were saying, "Oh, you're fear mongering, and this is, you're just trying to make the ANC look bad. Where do you see water shedding?" And I said, "Look, this is coming. The pipes are not being maintained. The infrastructure is not being maintained. The pumps at the reservoirs, all of those things not being maintained. They are going to fail. Water treatment plants are not being expanded to deal with increasing population. Right? We are going to run into trouble, and we will only notice once we get to water shedding, which we are getting now. There are many places around the country where water is no longer a guaranteed service. And this is a sign of a failing government. What gets to me, and I want to get back to what you were saying earlier about the type of leadership that we have. Your namesake in KwaZulu-Natal there, Sihle Zikalala. Right? We all know the story about the water tanker, right? What gets to me, right, is first there's that entitlement complex. I'm the premier, I must get a water tanker. But then they lie about it. Right? The Premier's office sends out a statement saying, "Oh, but the video was doctored." Right? It wasn't doctored. They lied through their teeth. They lied to you in your face. Then they say, "No, but the water tanker was actually on its way to go and deliver water and just stopped at the Premier's house on the way there." But it didn't. It delivered all of its water to the Premier's house for the Premier's exclusive use. Right? And then the Premier turns around and says, "Oh, sorry." Like, dude, that is not good enough. Sorry is not good enough. Your apology is not accepted. This shows your character. It disqualifies you from being the premier of a province. I'm sorry. This is just, in any civilized country, this person would be out on their ear within a day. And yet we employ these people. There's a spokesperson for the province, Lennox Mabaso, who goes and talks to Daily Maverick and says, "Oh, who says they're going to be looting? You can't generalize." Right? And it goes, in government, you know about the corruption because there are investigative bodies. So basically, yeah, we do get caught looting in government, but that's only because people are looking for the looting. You don't know what's happening in the NGOs, right? Those guys, that's what do they call them? A part of a corrupt enterprise, aided and abetted by the media in an effort to sully the efforts of government. Right, so he's going to war against the NGOs. Now, I tell you why I know that the NGO money is not being looted, Mr. Mabaso. A, I know what cars they drive, right? And B, I see Gift of the Givers the next bloody day. They're there, right, with food packages and blankets and efforts to help people rebuild. Right? When we had our fires in Knysna in 2017, right, the first people on the scene, Gift of the Givers. Right? I saw a headline a few days ago. The army is going to help KwaZulu-Natal. Right? They're sending 10,000 troops. They've managed to deploy 400 of those troops. Right? 2 weeks after the floods, they turn up with 400 troops. And this is supposed to be a response. This is not a response. Gifts to the Givers were there 2 weeks ago. Right? They were there doing what the government was supposed to be doing. And I absolutely agree with Gideon. It's time we recognize we do not have functional government in most of the country, and we need to start relying on the NGOs and the voluntary associations and private companies, because those are the ones that are going to help us when we need it.
And Ivo, Ivo, there are a few interviews that I decided not to flight tonight, because what the people said there was enough to get me into a lot of trouble if I'd flighted it on here. On that particular issue of the army in particular, where they were saying, and I'll just paraphrase for the sake of just giving you a taste of what was said. This was in Molweni, residents in Molweni, just outside Hillcrest / Waterfall. So it's outer west region of Durban. A community that is hard hit by these floods. It is a disaster zone. It looks like some area that's been bombed in many cases, landslides, you name it, anything that could have impacted on people's lives happened there. And there's a comment that this granny actually said to me, which actually broke my heart a little bit, but I could also feel the sense of palpable anger. She says, instantly when this thing happened, Amandia were here to help us. Amandia was her colloquial way of saying gift of the givers, because I think it perhaps just has a lot of Indian staff or whatever, but that's not really the issue. And she wasn't being pejorative in that expression. She was basically saying, Amandia were here to help us, and it was in the vein of, pardon me, food parcels, blankets, even medical equipment, not equipment, personnel, pardon me. The picture she painted to me was a comprehensive response, timelessly, by Gift of the Givers and other NGOs. She did mention a few others, including residents of she said Waterfall and Hillcrest, who came down. She said Abelungu from there, white people from there, and she was unapologetic in saying, I attribute my life today, or at least the relative comfort given the disaster, to these individuals who cared enough for me and often came in the name of either religious groupings, which she called these white people, apparently it's some church, or Gift of the Givers. I sat back and I thought to myself, I was like, let me prod this lady and see what she says. The moment I mentioned eThekwini municipality, or as was then the case, they had declared a provincial disaster. It wasn't the national yet. It was the provincial disaster was declared. I said, have you seen anybody from province? Have you seen anybody from the municipality? She said, for number one, and her language was so foul. I didn't expect this from a granny. She saw like a sailor. Like, that of a councillor has literally not shown his head in this part of the world, and I'm beeping myself because I'm trying to give you a sense of how she said it. And I smile now because I think to myself, she's now seeing the frustration of what it is exactly to place false hope in politicians and the political elites and expect them to help you in a time of need. Theuns, I'm going to come to you. And before I do that, let me just quickly say welcome to it. You are watching Liberty and Friends. We're effectively at that halfway mark of the show. Tonight, we're dealing just exclusively on the KZN floods. Brace yourself. I am going to start showing some clips, images of the destructive nature of that water. This was not a small storm, people. I know we're saying, oh, Durban was designed for this kind of weather, as it was. But I want to show you the nature of the destruction. And we're having a conversation around how it has been, the extent of the damage is almost as a correlation between it and government failure on the one hand and government policy on the other. So welcome to it. Please hit that like button. We're nowhere near where we should be in the likes. A very strong audience tonight, over 300 plus and growing watching, but hit that like button, please. Do me a favor, whether you're watching this simulcast on Facebook, Twitter, or on YouTube. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Theuns, we have a situation here where, as I said in that tweet, we need to have a very hard conversation, a very tough conversation, a very frank conversation with the nature of the people who govern us and the ineptitude of them. People see it on the ground. Even if the corporate media won't, even if they refuse to see it, we can see it on the ground. The ANC and Project ANC has been a momentous failure in this part of the world. And it begs the question, at least if you're an ANC politician, should you be sitting comfortable right now when people on the ground are literally saying to hell with you as ANC leadership on the one hand? I want you to grapple with that on the one hand. And then on the second front, I want to introduce the issue of looting, which became a bit of an issue here in eThekwini, where as the frustration was growing, from the failure of restoring electricity, the failure of restoring water, the looting. We started seeing frustration bubble over into scenes of looting. Just 2 blocks away from where I live, a USave store was looted here in Umlazi, and it was stymied by security and the police force. And this is where I might be a little controversial here, and I want to get your view, Theuns. When the looting began, my area was going on 5 days without electricity at that moment. And I warned at the time, in fact, I tweeted quite a lot at the time, there is a palpable anger in Umlazi. Nearly 1 million residents live in this township alone, and we were trapped in Umlazi. Supply trucks couldn't come in, relief trucks couldn't come in. We were effectively trapped because most of the entrances and exits were washed away. And I said, there is a palpable anger growing here as people, A, sit without electricity for days on end, and the food in their fridges is rotting, or B, there's no water here, and that this is now going to become a safety and security issue. And sure enough, as I'd finished tweeting that, a day or 2 later, we started seeing looting.
Yeah, seriously, I mean, you could have been a prophet with that prediction, but it always happens. Government ineptitude leads to frustration. Frustration leads to anger, and that anger has to be vented in some way or another. And here is where communities come in. First of all, we have to ask ourselves, why do we still have a government? What is this government actually doing for us? Because I don't see much. I live in Pretoria, one of the better governed cities in South Africa, and even here I can't really point at much that our community couldn't have done for ourselves if it was not for government intervention. But now what we see in KZN, and especially now, we saw it last year as well with the massive instances of looting and rioting. People were frustrated, they were angry, and they had to vent it in some way or another. And when that happened, it was communities coming to the rescue, protecting themselves, protecting their interests, and in the end, also providing relief. And we're seeing the same thing now. It's when all this happened, distrust in government was so big, and people approached us at Solidarity, and we created a fund. Please, if anyone has any need, approach us. We budgeted for it. We've donated a couple of 100,000, so we are ready to help. And also our neighborhood structures are available to help, talking about specifically about in the workplace solidarity ourselves, and then AfriForum on ground level. And the irony here is that it's very frequently groups that the statists reject, like religious groups. Like, let's not forget that churches were the first on the ground. You're a gift of the givers, or a religious organization, and they were the first to help. And the reason for that is religious groups act on a higher calling that government simply does not have. There's no vested interest in government helping, whereas churches, well, whether we believe in it or not, are fighting for souls and not just for what we see in front of us. The same goes for gift of the givers. But yeah, without getting into any of that, why do we outsource everything to government who has no sense of any responsibility towards us? And when we try to act for ourselves, they stand in our way actively. Why do we keep government in a place at all? I think South Africa's getting into more and more of a situation where we're questioning that. And yeah, the damage in itself is, I mean, approaching numbers that only government can solve, but they're not doing it. I mean, insurance companies are estimating, and that was a week ago already, damage to private property at 1.1 billion. I'm sure it's 3 or 4 by now, when after the mother is settled and all that. And the infrastructure damage, specifically damage to road and rail, comes fairly close to that. So, I mean, it's not just the damage that we can physically put a number on now, but it's the extensive damage, like our biggest port is being cut off from the rest of the country, and so many people are reliant on those exports and imports. And globally, it would have a massive impact eventually. I mean, Shanghai with their government lockdown, once again, government intervention making things worse. Ships are backed up there. Ships are now backed up around the Durban harbor. Internationally, all this just adds up. And South Africa will be, as a country, heavily hit by all this.
Sorry about that. I was just, and firstly, you're right. And I was just loading a clip that I wanted people to see, of firstly, just how bad it was in this part of the world, and how the destructive nature of these floods have destroyed everything. I mean, Theuns, you're right in mentioning that the port operations in this part of the world are basically bugged up. Toyota basically issuing a statement this weekend on Friday saying, of the thousands of vehicles that it produces from its Prospectum plant, only 500 were cleared to be able to be sold. The rest, which they didn't mention a number, but someone anonymously pointed out, could be as many as 4,000 vehicles will be basically scrapped. That's millions and millions of rands, of course. Jobs on the line. Infrastructure in this part of the world absolutely destroyed and devastated. Guys, please bear with me for a brief second. I want to show you the destructive nature of what exactly a lot of people went through, and how it now forms an almost traumatic memory for many people. Many who, of course, who saw even relatives being swept away by powerful water in this part of the world. Just give me a second, guys. I'm struggling a little bit here. Oh, really, Lucanio coming in here with the jab. I will let you respond to it a bit later in the show. But thank you nonetheless for the super chat, Lucanio. I see you, homie. And let me load this video now. This is, again, all of these images are courtesy of various residents in Mlazi here who sent me their video clips of the flooding in this part of the world.
That's what I'm talking about. Hey. It's so bad. It's so bad, guys. It's so bad. Ngale ndlela ukuthi kubi. Ngiphela ngisho ukukhuluma isilungu lana. Kubi ngale ndlela. Izindlu zabantu zimele. Abanye baphephukelwe bamukile. It was a house of a person. Yeah. They made Nanka maya mabuilding aphishekile. Hey. Thixo somandla over umoya wakho baba.
And if I just quickly do a quick translation there, aside from the expletives, this guy's basically showing you a video of where you see water. They're actually meant to be homes underneath all of that, and he's saying there are people who are literally either still trapped underneath there, obviously deceased at that moment. Others, he says, were literally swept away by the waters, and he says, people are displaced, and then obviously goes into I'll call it a prayer for lack of another word, to be honest. Let me play just one more, which I think shows a bit more of the destruction of the waters in themselves. Pardon me, guys. I am very rusty, unfortunately. There we go. All right. You know, even as I show you that image, there's two things that come to mind, and this is where I want the conversation to sort of go, because I want to unpack this ongoing question, the central theme that we have here, which is government failure. Gideon, I'm going to come to you, and then Dumo after that. That image you just saw now, the guy who spoke to me about it, it came from a particular guy who lives in that area. Those shacks you were seeing, there are people in there, by the way. Those shacks you were seeing are in one of many hundreds of informal settlements in Durban, where the failure by the eThekwini municipality to enforce property rights, to be able to take a at times necessarily tough stance and say to people, you cannot build here because you're below a flood line or whatever the case may be, even if it causes conflict, the failure of the eThekwini municipality to do that literally led to people losing their lives. Of course, it is a tough thing for any municipality to do, to get rid of and to push people away from trying to build shacks in certain areas. But the failure to do that literally saw people lose their lives. And this guy, as I was speaking to him, and he lives in one of the shacks in the area, says, you know what? When I asked him the question, will you be rebuilding in this part of the world? He says, you know what? No. Even as others were chiming in and saying, yes, we'll rebuild because the state must help us and blah, blah, blah. But a lot of people said, actually, we get it. We get why this is dangerous. We're just sad no one was brave enough to say, look, this shouldn't happen here. There's a need to have this conversation, isn't there, Gideon?
Absolutely. And, one of the more controversial things I probably said is that for me, the true legacy of apartheid is the fact that we created this idea that government is a parental figure and that the state, the government must provide, and whether that's providing guidance or sustenance or be in control of so-called strategic sectors or industries in the sense of it. And you encounter it a lot when you confront people in the street about basic stuff that's wrong in their lives or wrong in their economic situation or wrong in their neighborhood. Is sometimes the first response is government must do XYZ, and I'm going, that is precisely the type of thinking that leads to disasters like this one, in the sense of we firmly understand after 27 years of ANC governance what sort of animal they are, and that they are criminal to the degrees of misgovernance and the neglect that they give not just infrastructure but basic governance as such. So if we are going to treat government as our parent, and we know that government is in this case an abusive, alcoholic, molesting parent that should certainly should be locked up in a maximum security prison and certainly not be allowed anywhere near children, then the big daddy government in our case is a very bad big daddy government. This is the result: is people die. And the only true way part of this, I mean, we can vote the ANC out in 2024. We can have this massive political upheaval and the gigantic political space change as a result of voter apathy and, eventually the ANC losing enough support to no longer be a national government or provincial government. That doesn't change the fact that we need to have a national conversation about changing our attitudes towards our own governance almost 180 degrees. We can no longer outsource these responsibilities to a central or even a federalized government. There needs to be a strong understanding of property rights and why they matter, and a direct, hard ownership of those property rights. There needs to be the offshoots of something like that would not necessarily prevent something like this from happening, but would certainly make it less common, I'd like to believe, and also mitigate the consequences thereof, because stuff like this frankly wouldn't happen. There's a lot of catch up we're going to be playing. This isn't something that we're going to be fixing overnight, but everything that we have wrought over the past almost 3 decades has led to this. And I'm pessimistic that this isn't going to be the last of it. We're going to be learning a great many more hard lessons in the immediate near-term future, which I'm hoping, as a bit of an accelerationist, doesn't end us, because I'm not a nihilist either. I would like it to be a catalyst for us to change the way we think about our own governance radically and have a much smaller government and much more direct citizen power involvement in this. Otherwise, the circus will continue perpetually.
Absolutely. And guys, I just want to take a quick pause at Dumo. We'll come to you in a moment. It's 9 p.m. That means we are in the final 30 minutes of the show. We are going to begin to taper it off here as we and I saw a slight criticism in the comments, guys. We're not going to talk about the problems only, but we will look at, what are some of the interventions, and as Gideon is rightly saying, what does it mean to take a complete 180 insofar as how we look at what is the relationship between citizens and the state, how big the state should be in any case. And as someone like Theuns perhaps will be a better voice in articulating how communities and really organizations such as Solidariteit of AfriForum or Gift of the Givers or whatever the case may be, should be the more central type organizations, community-based organizing, if you will, that strengthens the family unit and, of course, sees people be able to deal with the issues at a local level much better than any government or any centralized authority could lead it. So we'll unpack all of that and give some interventions, ideas in that regard as we end off the show in the last 30 minutes. But Dumo, I must come to you because, as I said, the central question that for me overrides all other issues here as we begin to look at the politics, the social nature of the disaster, the economics of it all is where government does take control of something, whether you agree with that or not is not the issue, but rather where government does take control of something and then fails in the execution of its duty in that particular regard, the consequences are absolutely devastating, if anything, even deadly in this particular case. And someone like this guy, I nearly named him shame, but someone like this guy who, shows you what are homes of his neighbors. And in the coming weeks, as they were unearthing bodies from that part of the world, and he was saying to me yesterday that the task is becoming so much harder now. Let me just quickly give you the most recent stats. From the KZN flooding, 435 lives have been lost. 54 people are still missing. And the state, that says Usihle Zigalala, the premier of this province, saying, 1.9 billion is needed to address this. Of course, some of it will disappear, as you rightly said, into the pockets of politicians. But the point is 400 plus people dead, 50 plus missing. And this guy, let me bring it close to home. This guy saying, look, I know two neighbors, one of whom I saw being swept out into sea, or effectively what would be being swept out to sea, because they live near the canal that collects the Umlazi River and pushes out to sea. This is the canal that cuts between Mondi and Sapref, the refinery and the paper factory here in Durban. Sorry, I'm waffling. Let me get to the point. He knows one of his neighbors was swept out to sea. And, he basically says, hopefully the current will bring them back so that the family has closure. But he says the other guy he knows is literally buried underneath tons of mud that the river kicked up. And of course, these shacks that were mangled into a heap. And now he's saying two things that began to happen in his neighborhood, which actually broke my heart. One, we can smell some of the bodies because it's been 2 weeks now. It's obviously a putrid, sort of smell in the area. And secondly, it's harder to get the bodies out because that mud that I'm talking about is obviously caking up because we've had sunny weather for the past 2 weeks. But Dumo, I wanted to come back to you on this one and say, I listened to the story, and in the back of my mind, as I was listening to it, I descended into a fit of rage. And I just swore in my head as he was talking, and saying, I'm laying this all at the feet of a gaggle of politicians, officials in this part of the world who simply gave themselves the power and the exclusive power to make decisions around these issues, but have failed these people. It is poor, mostly Black South Africans, Dumo, who are failed by these ideologues in government.
Agreed. And I think what's going to happen is that based on the failure of the government in this regard, they're going to request that they need more power. And that's the real sad thing about the government, is that whenever they fail at something, They'll say they have failed because of they did not have enough privileges or power to handle the situation at hand. And this is just typical. When you get power, you want more of it. The lust for it doesn't stop. And then now you're talking, and now you're mentioning like really people are going to have to find their loved ones and so forth, and that's going to be a very difficult process because some of their bodies are buried under meters of mud, and that's going to be a very tough thing for them. And what's going to happen afterwards? The government is going to just make press statements on this, and then they'll continue with their lives, and that's it. And then they're going to expect to get voted in at the polls. And this is just, I just think that, you know, South Africans also need to wake up. Like, guys, this is it. I mean, we complain about potholes, right? And so forth. But that's the thing. I mean, if they can't even fix the potholes, what makes you think that they're actually going to provide decent relief with regards to these floods? And that is a very scary thought, guys. These guys are ill-equipped. These are just people that are just being pushed into government positions so that they can just earn a salary, and that's it. Many of them wouldn't even get a job in the private sector. So this is the thing, guys, and I think that we need to, you know, like make sure that these guys do not take more of our freedoms away, because I'm pretty sure we can, just by, you know, like just doing basic stuff, we can actually do a better job than the government. I mean, you know, we provide relief better than the state. I mean, people even saw the weather and they said, hey, this is actually a bad storm that's coming. Many people saw it before the government. So really, I just think that, you know, the government just keeps on failing, and we must just wake up and just be like, guys, we must just, I wouldn't say take matters into our own hands like a vigilante group, but, you know, let's be sensible in taking back what belongs to us and things that we can do ourselves.
Guys, as I begin to taper us off in the conversation, and thank you so much to those who have stuck with us from the very beginning. This is Liberty and Friends in conversation with Ivo Vegter, independent journalist, Theuns Buisson, who's of course from Solidarity. That's the union, the fellows out in Pretoria. Shout out to them. And of course, I will take them up on that that offer to help, you know, and see who can help them coordinate that relief that they're donating on the ground. Dumo Denga, the host of ManPatria, and of course, Gideon Joubert from Paratus.info. Make sure you check him out, please. As we taper off the conversation, and we'll get into the what now. What can we do from a liberty perspective, from a conservative perspective? What should be the ideal form of response, and what should citizens be doing? I'm gonna put that loaded question to you guys. I want to show you just one more clip, guys. This one it's on my my Twitter feed of just how disappointing but predictable. Never underestimate the predictability of stupid people. And in this instance, here's an alleged. I want to use the word alleged just for legal purposes, because like I know what's going to happen. You know, they'll probably want to use me as an example. Here's an alleged case of theft by municipal officials of what were donations given by private individuals and private organizations, NGOs, and the municipality that waltzed in, literally loaded them up on trucks and claimed it was going to go hand them out to the poor.
Is Etequini stealing the aid?
Okay, I know you heard that, but didn't see it. Just give me a second, people. This should work in a moment. A moment is now, Sihle, not a South African moment of now. There we go.
Is Etequini stealing the aid? Stealing the aid that was distributed by the residents of Durban North to go to the rescue crews, and Etequini are busy stealing it. This is it. They came and loaded truckloads in here and are busy stealing the aid. This will go to every single journalist. You will be famous. They even got the police when our guys tried to fight to stop it from going. I'm literally parked my car in front to stop them from going. Is Etequini stealing the aid?
Sorry about that delay. Shout out to that Ford Cougar, man, stopping that whole convoy. It's amazing what a little car can do.
Besides blowing up.
Leave aside the hysteria that the lady was presenting that with. And again, shout out to her, man. I don't know who it is, but shout out to her insofar as actually taking a stand on this alleged incident of pilfering by municipal officials of what was meant to be private donations that were meant to be handed out via the because that was at Virginia Airport, if I'm not mistaken, and Virginia Airport was being used by a lot of the helicopters that were flying in and out of more rural areas to donate these particular items. Just to be fair to the eThekwini municipality, they did issue a response to this. I would put it on screen, but it's not worth it. I'll just paraphrase. They said, well, look, it wasn't theft. It was a misunderstanding. They said they were actually taking these items to be tested, blah, blah, blah. And there was just a little bit of a misunderstanding. And how dare this lady impugn the character of that particular individual? That is effectively the gist of eThekwini's response. You be the judge as to the veracity and truth of that statement. But Ivor, let me come to you, and we're going to do that last round of everybody. As you respond, also talk to me about the what now. What would the ideal response look like? Who should we, as Durban residents, who should we be looking to, if at all, someone to look to? Is there a messiah? Is there a savior in this incident? What are your thoughts in this top 3 ideas on how we bring back Durban? And of course, just generally, the sort of policy that is actually now needed for a prosperous Durban post this KZN disaster?
Well, that's a very, very difficult question, Sihle. One of the problems here is that the more the private sector starts muscling in on the government, it starts doing things for themselves. We see this now with NGOs helping out and with disaster relief and so on. The more the government responds by saying, oh, but you do that. We have a failing post office, so the couriers come up and they sort things out, and we can now trust the courier to actually deliver stuff. And then the government turns around and says, oh, no, but we can't have the couriers deliver letters and stuff. That must be the post office. Nothing under 1 kilo can be couriered. That all must go to the post office with the South African Weather Service. Right? No. Only the Weather Service can provide weather updates. Right? It's going to get to a point where the government says, well, only the government can provide disaster relief. And they're going to carry on stealing the disaster relief that is privately funded. The eThekwini municipality, they call it fake news, this whole thing at the airport there, that they stole these supplies. They're really shameless. So what to do? It really isn't very easy. What to do is vote them out, kick them out. You cannot tolerate people like Sandile Gumede and Sihle Sikalala in government. They are not trustworthy people. They need to be kicked out. They need to be replaced with a government that will say, all right, let's take a breather here, and let's start doing the basics well. Let's make a list of the 10 most important services that the government provides and start doing them well. Make sure that sewage works. Make sure that water pipes that are 60, 70 years old and they only have a 30-year lifespan, make sure that those get replaced. Pump maintenance, all of those sort of things are the basic things. If the government had done basic infrastructure management here and things like solid waste control, this disaster would have been a lot less bad. It would have been bad. It was a heavy storm and KwaZulu-Natal does flood. But imagine if the flood was only half as bad, because the stormwater drainage worked better. How many lives could have been saved? And that's really where it comes down to. It's It's not that these things aren't going to happen. These things are going to happen. These are disasters, natural weather events. They are going to happen. But we need to be able to minimize the damage, and that means the government needs to start doing the basics right, and if necessary, do only the basics. Right? Stop getting involved in all this other stuff that they're spending money on. Just focus on the basics and try and get that right. But I'm afraid you can't get the ANC to do that. You have to kick them out of government and get someone else in there that will turn around and say, okay, we will provide basic services, and that's it.
Absolutely. Excellent start in that regard. Gideon, let me come to you because, I want you to focus on the safety and the security aspect of this because, anybody who, actually I didn't post this for actual security reasons, but I feel confident to talk about it now. But there was a period here in Mlazi where I was very certain that, hashtag Boogaloo, man. Things were getting that bad. It really felt as though all semblance of law and order was flying out the window, and a frustrated, angry, and really trapped near on million people in a relatively, no, I shouldn't say small, Mlazi not small, but like a near million people, who are being denied basic services were literally about to explode. And it's funny. A lot of that warning, that early warning I was pushing out, clearly was reflected by the state security agencies, or at least their intelligence units, because my township now of Umlazi, I can tell you now, is swimming with police and army. We have units, public order police units from as far as the Western Cape, Boland, Ekurhuleni. I've seen some police vehicles that have Ekurhuleni on them. Lots of the Eastern Cape were literally pumped into Umlazi. We at least have 3 times more the number of police than ordinarily is the case. And again, I say this only because you can see it in the various, I don't call them, the little stickers on the police vehicles of where these cops and this extra resources come from. And of course, the army is beginning to roll through here. They clearly saw what I saw, which is Umlazi and perhaps other parts of Durban were a tinderbox. Talk to me, Gideon, about the need, therefore, for someone like me or any other resident to actually not rely on that. Because who knows, maybe the next disaster won't see the state respond with that extra police force, and it already was late anyway, and there's that period of time where it wasn't here. What should we be doing in situations like these, and even beyond a disaster?
Okay, so I'm going to keep it brief because we are running out of time, and this is a topic that could take hours to discuss. But what most people get wrong is when they talk about disaster preparedness, is they prepare for a specific situation in their head, and depending upon what sort of wacky tobacco you might be smoking, you might be preparing for anything from a realistic natural disaster to some without rule of law situation. WROL is the abbreviation for that if you see me using it online. Or they were preparing for some EMP attack from the Chinese government. The reality is that, though, that no matter what disaster occurs, the immediate knock-on effects and consequences are almost always similar and the same. Is you sit in a situation where electricity provision will be compromised or entirely cut off. Drinkable or safe water provision will be compromised or cut off. Your ability to refrigerate food or even purchase it or gain access to sustenance will be severely compromised, and there will be significant effects on your economic situation as well as your personal safety situation. And my advice to people is that don't overcomplicate this. Start with yourself. There are 3 tiers of personal security and safety development that are within the scope of every person to achieve, regardless of their financial situation, their abilities, or intelligence. The first one is develop yourself. Basic things: physical fitness, your situational awareness, your ability to sustain yourself in a hostile situation is dependent on most common sense factors. Once you've gotten yourself sorted out, or while you're busy sorting yourself out, work on your family structure and make them resilient against these sort of things. Have some drinking water supply on hand, some food supply on hand that can last you maybe a week or 2 if that's within your means. Have the ability to have a plan to get yourself out of a situation, understanding full well that any plan probably won't survive, but be adaptable. And then thirdly, and this is very importantly, when we're talking about making government irrelevant and we're talking about community resilience, start basic mutual assistance groups within your community as it is. And this can be basic things like providing first aid and sustenance needs to people in the event of an emergency, in order to help the most vulnerable, to something far bigger than that, in order to make your community almost entirely self-reliant in the event of a disaster or even a normal time, including with regards to security and law and order. So there are different tiers to this. It's a big topic on its own, but it starts with your mindset, in the sense of you need to believe that your life and the lives of your family and the lives of the people in your community are worth defending against disaster and against criminals, and putting things in place and starting to work on things in order to make your community and yourself and your family resilient. So it's an attitude change that's required. It's taking active ownership, aggressive active ownership of the situation, and not waiting for government to fix it. And certainly not relying on government to ever come save you, because as we've seen twice now in KZN in the space of a year, that's not going to happen. They'll pitch up after the fact with a whole bunch of law enforcement resources because they're paranoid and absolutely terrified of their repeated chronic failures finally manifesting in some sort of social uprising that would very violently lift them from their pillows, and in the words of Emma Goldman, give them their just desserts at the end of a rope or at the bottom of a guillotine. But that's the only reason you are unfortunately seeing those law enforcement resources issue. They don't care about preventing looting. They're caring about the population and seating them.
Sadly true. And I mean, sadly true. And trust you me, part of that preparation, people like me now, are really trying to now buckle down and, finally get their gun licenses going. I'm sure many more people in this part of the world are going to be doing exactly that. Shout out to Ihau Training Center. I'll be bringing you content of my journey to getting my gun license and training through the Ihau guys out in Pinetown. Shout out to them. You'll see them very, very soon. Theuns, let me come to you. I think the question now has to come in the sense of voluntary cooperation and organizations like yours, of individuals who voluntarily come together to achieve things. In your case, a trade union, that sees people get together to cooperate on labor matters, but really beyond that, there's other organizations, AfriForum, Gift of the Givers. I can go down the line insofar as these various organizations, but the importance of supporting them not only just at this time, but just generally. And maybe is that the future of South Africa? Community-based organizations, civic society organizations?
Yeah, no, for sure, Cecily. The solution to South Africa's problems, at least in the short to medium term, would definitely not be a political solution. You don't even have to look further than your payslip to see that, how much tax is getting deducted from that. And then when you go out, you pay even more tax in the form of VAT and the fuel levy and municipal taxes. And well, the list can go on for hours, but we're not getting any worth for that money. So the political solution, it just wouldn't happen, especially if you take into account with this disaster, people most heavily affected were poor people. And you can't solve poverty without having economic growth. And economic growth and the rich getting richer usually goes hand in hand. And all three, the biggest parties in South Africa, have this immense obsession with eradicating inequality rather than with establishing growth. And eradicating inequality happens automatically when you have substantial financial and economic growth. And we haven't seen economic growth in South Africa, real economic growth, since 2008. So, unless we get a whole new political system and rethink what we want from government, that's not going to happen. So the solution will be in communities rising up, communities joining organizations such as ourselves, your local CPF, Community Policing Forum, churches who do outreaches, anything like that. Even a first step would be go meet your neighbors, have a plan as a group. We can't do this alone. And government certainly isn't going to do it on our behalf. And when I say government, I mean it from national government to your local municipality. You may be blessed to live in one or two towns where in South Africa where government is doing a good job, but there's an almost 100% chance that you're not. So we have to do it for ourselves, and smaller groups doing exactly that. Start with yourself, go meet your neighbors, join a group that does that. Be prepared, as Gideon said as well. Start with yourself, reach out to your community, and the rest will follow. Don't wait for government to do it. It's not going to happen, no matter who's ruling in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, speaking about my neck of the woods, I'm hearing gunshots very, very close to my window. I might need to just check that out in a second, but let me just wrap up the show. Dumo, maybe as I ask you to wrap this notion up of the what now and what we can do as citizens. And I've actually forgotten my train of thought now because this is really close to my window. But there's a conversation now here about really, and I think the KZN floods have red-pilled a lot of Durban residents to actually realize, holy heck, you are on your own. As a classical liberal, I talk a lot about the individual, but really, we're a family society, and the impetus of placing your family first often means it's ironic. The supposed selfishness or self-interest of looking after yourself as an individual and family first actually allows you to then be able to help others once you are okay. Let me be precise and specific. Prior to this disaster, I already had that sort of prepper mindset. I installed the JoJo tank, the water pump, the generator, of what I can, of course, within my budget, within my means, after years of saving. And I'm now beginning the savings to put up solar panels so that I'm completely independent. But the point I wanted to get to is because I had the JoJo tank, because I had this and that, I was then able to, when the water ran out completely for days on end, load the bakkie up with buckets, call on my neighbors and say, bring me your buckets, bring me your water containers, load them in the bakkie, let's drive to wherever we can in Mlazi and get you water. On the one hand, yes, to help my neighbors, but on the other hand, out of self-interest too, because if I have unhappy neighbors, that translates into civil unrest. So if I can help my neighbors sort themselves out, it helps the area. Should we not be having that conversation, Dumo, around actually empowering the individual is empowering the family, empowering the community?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's actually a very good thing, that when you are part of a community and things like this occur, you can actually assist others who will need assistance in getting water and so forth. So I think, now that you mentioned when you said we're on our own, it reminds of that famous Steve Biko quote as well. And now it's now you take black men and you just say South African, you're on your own, or non-ANC guy, you're on your own. So I think now what people need to just really look at now is that they need to see how they can actually become more state-proof. And I think the best thing to do is, I think that now that we had these disasters and so forth, what we can do is, citizens can donate to organizations that can provide assistance during those times. And also, I think when it comes to civil society as well, you need to support organizations that will help you with regards to civil society, like IRR, AfriForum, you name it. I'm sorry if I didn't mention other important names, but that's what we need to do now. I think that also, if we don't do something like this, and you don't build something now, when the next disaster does come along, you may be left stranded, and the damage that's caused might be so bad that you can't recover from it. But if you're in a tightly knit community where people are supporting each other, you can actually withstand it. There might be some damage caused, but you can actually recover from that damage. So definitely, band together, support the right organizations, get your community going. And I think we'll start to see progress in that way, because South Africa is becoming very libertarian in that way. And not to say that I like it, but it's looking good. I mean, people are people are just really becoming state proof, and this is really cool. So we might be like the first proper libertarian society. Then that's great.
Oh, God willing. Guys, we've completely run out of time. As always on the show, I'd like to thank the Friends panel. You guys are absolute gold. This has been another broadcast of Liberty and Friends. Before we go, very briefly, please, everybody, just 10 seconds. How do the folks find you on your social media? And if you are a writer or a content producer, what can we expect from your channel or your particular website? Ivo.
You can find me on Twitter. That's where I normally hang out on social media, at Ivo Vegter. And otherwise, you can read me twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays at the dailyfriend.co.za, which is the IRS news publication.
Excellento. Thank you very much. That's Ivo Vegter, of course, out in the Southern Cape, beautiful part of the world. That Theuns, how do we find you, homie? And how do we get in touch with Solidarity? I know we'll chat offline. I'll get in touch with you guys at Solidarity about that disaster relief. But how do the folks get in touch with you guys?
Well, you can follow us on Solidarity's social media and online platforms, Solidarity or Solidariteit. I'm very rarely on social media, but you can follow me at Buisson on Twitter. Otherwise, you just have to bump into me in person. That's a safer bet.
Excellento. That is, of course, Theuns out at Solidarity. Shout out to them, man. Doing excellent work, including representing their guys. Lots of work they're doing at the moment. I do see their press releases. I'll probably get them on the show to discuss some of the big things they're working on at the moment. Speaking about big things, Gideon Joubert of Paratus.info. Make sure you find his stuff. Gideon, what can we expect from you this week? What are you busy with, man?
Sishe, I'm busy with so much. A lot of the DSA stuff's been keeping me busy, but that's a whole nother thing. But if you want to check out my personal writing, Paratus.info, you can follow me on social media at your own risk at Paratus2014. And yeah, it's been great. It was great being here again and being able to spend time with a really cool panel, and it was a fantastic discussion. Thanks to everyone who tuned in as well.
Absolutely good to have you with us, my brother. And of course, last but not least, Dumo. Baba, what can we expect on ManPatria show tomorrow, 7 p.m.?
Yeah. So tomorrow we're having Phil Craig on. We're going to be talking about the Free the Cape March, which will be on Freedom Day. So there's going to be a great discussion happening there. It's the second time he's coming onto the show. So I'm really looking forward to that discussion. And if you want to find me on Twitter, you can just find me at Dumo Denga, or you can go to @ManPatria_ZA, or you can just go to the website manpatria.com.
Yeah, there you go. You have heard it. ManPatria tomorrow with Upra. I just forgot his name now, but Free the Cape March out in that part of the world. For whatever reason, Phil Craig, there you go. Tomorrow. Make sure you catch the ManPatria show tomorrow. And as I say goodbye to all of my guests, a big thank you for having watched and stuck with us tonight. So glad to be back on air. It's been a very, very tough 2 weeks, literally having zero services, including as that flower was like, literally having even no signal to be able to broadcast anything here. So trust you me, thank you, Lord, for having kept us safe here in Mlazi. And yeah, condolences to everybody who really has lost friends or family through these storms. We are Durbanites, folks. We will band together. We will see the back of the storm, and we will rebuild the city. You build a country, you build its economy. So with that being said, a big thank you again for watching. Remember, if you want to support the show, all of those details are in the descriptor of this video. God bless you, people. Thank you very much for watching. And remember, as I always say at the end of every show, never trust a commie